As we end the week and have a whole nother day of markets, the U.S. stock market has now lost $6.4 trillion in just 2 days.
That we're looking at much greater odds of a recession, not just here, but globally.
Right now, U.S. stocks plunge deeper, capping worst week since 2020, which again was the pandemic. Trump's tariffs set off two-day sell-off as recessionary fears mount. More than $6 trillion erased from market.
This is one of the most brutal market meltdowns in modern history. In a single trading week, more than $6.4 trillion in value vanished from U.S. stock markets, gone, evaporated like smoke. And now, the very man who lit the match is scrambling to pretend it was all part of the plan. It started with tariffs. A sweeping, aggressive tariff blitz Donald Trump branded Liberation Day. But for millions of Americans, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like the floor collapsing beneath them. Global markets didn't wait to react. They retaliated fast with counter tariffs, and just like that, Wall Street entered freefall. Can the American economy survive another crash like this? Will Trump's strategy backfire before the election even begins? And most importantly, what does this mean for your paycheck, your 401k, and your ability to afford basic essentials? We're breaking it all down in today's video. But before we dive into the full impact, make sure you're subscribed because this isn't just politics. It's personal. It started with a podium, a grin, and one of Donald Trump's favorite words, tariffs. From a press conference draped in American flags, he announced what he called Liberation Day, a sweeping new set of import taxes meant to punish trade partners and bring manufacturing back home. The message was bold, the tone triumphant. But Wall Street didn't cheer. It winced. Within hours, the markets reacted like they'd been punched in the gut. Stocks tumbled, tech firms sank, industrial giants hit the brakes. And before the week was over, more than $6 trillion in market value had vanished, wiped clean from portfolios, pension funds, and retirement accounts across the globe. As the financial system buckled, investors looked to Washington for leadership, and they found Trump, well, golfing. While global headlines screamed of collapse, he was driven across the rolling greens of his Palm Beach estate, smiling for cameras, completely untouched by the chaos. And then he posted, "This is a great time to get rich," on Truth Social. A nation was watching its economy unravel, and the man at the center of it all was cracking jokes online. But Trump didn't stop there. "Sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something," he later told reporters aboard Air Force One. He wasn't just dismissing the panic, he was trying to own it and brand it as a strategy. But here's the thing, no one trusts a doctor who smiles while you're bleeding. Inside the White House, officials tried to reframe the fallout as part of a larger plan. But outside those walls, phones were ringing off the hook, calls to the Federal Reserve, murmurs on Capitol Hill, and rising discomfort from GOP insiders who had once sold Trump as the architect of a booming economy. And still, the damage spread. GE's healthcare division watched its stock dive. Nintendo delayed a major console release. Auto plants across North America dimmed the lights and sent workers home until further notice. Publicly, companies tried to sound measured, but if one looked beyond the mask, they could see that there was panic everywhere. Meanwhile, Trump kept doubling down online. He taunted foreign leaders, declared that only the weak will fail, and insisted that countries around the world were dying to make a deal. But there were no deals. What there was instead was silence. Nervous press conferences postponed, global markets bracing, allies issuing statements so carefully worded they read more like hostage notes than diplomatic responses. The world was holding its breath, and Trump was tweeting through it. At the Fed, Jerome Powell was diplomatic but serious. He warned that the tariffs could push inflation even higher while slowing growth. But instead of collaboration, Trump fired back at him too. Cut interest rates, Jerome, and stop playing politics. It was more than just a break in protocol. It was a warning shot. And for many watching, it felt like Trump wasn't steering the ship. He was setting it on fire. The criticism came quickly. Democratic lawmakers torched him for his absence and his tone. Even Republican Senator Ted Cruz voiced concern, saying the tariffs could backfire and hurt American jobs. At that moment, the political tide began to turn. This wasn't Trump versus China. It wasn't Trump versus the media. It was Trump versus the economy, Trump versus the market, Trump versus the fallout of his own decisions. And while Trump's inner circle kept trying to spin the chaos as strength, the reality on the ground was starting to crack. Financial advisors were flooded with phone calls. Retirement accounts took massive hits. The average American who might not follow the S&P every day felt it in grocery bills, gas pumps, and the tightening grip of uncertainty. That's the part Trump never addressed. He never spoke about the businesses forced to shut down production, or the workers caught in limbo, or the families watching their savings drain while their leaders played chicken with the global economy. Instead, he told them to stay calm and get rich. But the calm was long gone, because in the end, it didn't matter how steady Trump's hands looked on a golf club, or how confident he sounded through a screen. The markets had already passed judgment. On April 4th, China roared, not with words, but with a 34% blanket tariff on every U.S. import. Soybeans, semiconductors, aircraft parts, poultry, everything. Beijing also announced immediate restrictions on rare earth exports, materials with names most Americans have never heard of, but rely on every day. Dysprosium, terbium, samarium, and many other materials essential to smartphones, electric vehicles, and advanced weapon systems. China controls over 70% of the world's supply, and now it was closing the taps. The ripple effect was instant. Tech firms wobbled, defense contractors froze. Analysts called it a worst-case scenario, warning of an industrial slowdown that could gut electronics, healthcare, and automotive supply chains before summer. Still, China wasn't finished. Then China released a cutting message, diplomatic, but ice-cold based off an old proverb: courtesy demands reciprocity. That is, you strike us, we strike harder. And that's exactly what they did. U.S. agricultural imports slashed. Sorghum shipments were suspended. Imports of poultry and bone meal from American producers were halted without warning, and Chinese customs officials hinted more bans were on the table. For U.S. farmers and food exporters, the consequences were brutal. With over $13 billion in American agricultural exports and more than $15 billion in electrical machinery trade at stake, the market wasn't just wounded. It was wide open, and Brazil and Australia immediately rushed in, eyeing the vacuum the U.S. had left behind. Energy didn't escape either. U.S. fuel exports to China, once worth nearly $15 billion, were now under threat. Canceled contracts, delayed shipments, and layoffs in key regions loomed large. And then, as if trying to crack a joke to relieve the tension, Trump posted, "China panicked, the one thing they can't afford to do." But here's the reality. China didn't panic. It planned, carefully, methodically. One would think that's the end, but it didn't stop with China. In Ottawa, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood at the podium and announced his own blowback: a 25% tariff on American-made vehicles that didn't meet USMCA standards. Canada had been patient. Now, it was done playing nice. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese issued a more restrained but cutting rebuke. "This is not the act of a friend," he said. "It goes against everything our partnership stands for." Trump had slapped a 20% tariff on EU imports. The European Commission was drafting a list of US goods to hit back with. Japan expressed deep regret and launched a task force to assess how to respond. Their message was subtle, but unmistakable. Retaliation was on the table. Indonesia condemned the tariffs, choosing diplomacy over escalation. But their trade minister warned the U.S. was putting long-term relations at risk. Vietnam's government also requested immediate talks with the U.S., hoping to dismantle the trade wall before it crippled exports. And Malaysia's Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, called for a coordinated regional response, warning that these tariffs could destabilize Southeast Asia's entire supply chain network. Trump may have expected the world to bend. Instead, it turned. The retaliation was fast, global, and precise. America had fired the first shot, but it was now facing a coordinated counterstrike that threatened not just its economy, but its global influence. And the message from Beijing to Brussels was clear. If Trump wanted a trade war, he just got one. But when the dust of political theater clears, what's left is real. The receipt at your local grocery store, the credit card bill creeping higher, and the growing pressure pressing down on the American household. Trump's so-called Liberation Day wasn't just a declaration, it was a detonator. With the stroke of a pen in the Rose Garden, the U.S. government launched the largest tariff expansion in modern history. A baseline 10% tax on every single import, with reciprocal rates climbing as high as 54% for countries like China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. The administration framed it as strength, but on the ground, its cost is steady, rising, and unavoidable. Because no matter how Trump spins it, tariffs aren't paid by foreign governments. They're paid by you. From the minute those levies take effect, U.S. importers, from Walmart to your neighborhood hardware store, are on the hook. And to keep their margins intact, they do the only thing they can. They pass it on to consumers. Let's break it down. At the supermarket, you'll feel it first in the fruit aisle. Tariffs on Latin American countries, like Brazil and Colombia, are already pushing up prices on staples like coffee, bananas, and chocolate. You may not notice the spike immediately, but that's the trick. Inflation creeps. It climbs behind the scenes. And soon, the $3.99 bag of coffee is $5.25. The imported chocolate bar is now a luxury, not a snack. Electronics are next. Nearly all iPhones are assembled in China, and Vietnam has become a top supplier of components. Under Trump's new plan, China faces a 34% tariff. Vietnam, 46%. That $1,000 smartphone could now run you $1,400 or more. Apple might eat some of the cost, but you'll eat the rest. Clothing and footwear? Nearly 97% of all shoes and garments sold in the US are imported. Expect to see higher prices at every major retailer from Target to Nordstrom. Wine and spirits? European vintners are reeling. A 20% tariff on French and Italian wine. A 10% hike on Scotch whiskey. Importers are warning that final retail prices could jump as much as 40%. Even furniture isn't safe. 30 to 40% of the furniture sold in the US comes from abroad, the bulk of it from tariff-hit countries. Whether you're buying a couch, a crib, or a kitchen table, expect to pay more, wait longer, and have fewer choices. And then there's the car in your driveway. Trump's auto tariffs will hit both imported cars and US-made vehicles that rely on foreign parts. That means no one is spared. Analysts project that prices could climb between $3,000 and $20,000, depending on the make and model. In a country where many families already live paycheck to paycheck, that's not just a price hike. That's a locked door on mobility, on work, on life. Yale's Budget Lab estimates these new tariffs will cost the average American household an additional $3,800 this year. And that's just in direct spending. It doesn't include lost jobs, delayed wage growth, or stock market losses that have already shredded retirement accounts and college funds. Stellantis has already paused production at multiple plants. Over 900 workers are temporarily laid off. Economists warn of recession. J.P. Morgan has raised the likelihood of a full economic downturn to 60%. But the administration wouldn't blink. Trump insists the tariffs are leverage, that they're power. But power for whom? Certainly not for the family in Ohio, forced to delay buying a new washer because prices are up. Not for the couple in Arizona watching their food budget stretch thinner. And certainly not for the American consumer, who never voted for this war but now finds themselves footing the bill. If this is economic strategy, it's a strategy built on sacrificing the many for the optics of the few. A populist message cloaked in nationalist policy with a price tag that lands on every dinner plate, every gas tank, every receipt. Because when the tariffs hit, they don't hit headlines, they hit home. And with that, we've come to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when next we have something for you. Thanks for watching.